Thanks for joining us on the wonderful world of genealogy, a Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. The title of this episode is How, When and Why Did They Arrive? While stories are frequently passed down orally, it's essential for family historians to corroborate such narratives with credible sources of information. In this episode, our hosts Maree and Ken Shilling will explore various methods for accomplishing this task.
If you do not have Indigenous origins, then this question, how, when, and why did they come, is one which all family historians will have to face sooner or later when the question is asked, how did my family come to be in Australia? The how is the easy part of the question. When might be a little more difficult to pin down, but the why is the most intriguing and difficult part of the question to be discovered. Did the Australian branch of your family start with the arrival of one individual, or did a whole family arrive? Did they choose to migrate to Australia, or was their passage compulsory? These and many more questions wait to be answered. Perhaps a starting point would be to check if your ancestor's name appears on a list of convicts sent to Australia. Try Find Your Convict Ancestors at www.convictrecords.com.au, or simply put your ancestor's name and possible date into your preferred search engine. If you find the first of your ancestors to set foot on Australian soil may have been a convict, then throw your hat in the air and celebrate that fact. There are so many records easily available today which cover a convict's crime, trial, and transportation to this country, their assignment, and any indulgence granted to them, such as a ticket of leave. Take as an example my ancestor, George Lonsdale, born around 1810 in Leatherhead near London. His occupation was that of a tavern porter, and at the age of 16 years he was accused of theft and embezzlement, found guilty, and sentenced to a severe whipping, followed by confinement for 9 months. The trial was held at the Old Bailey, and a brief report can be found on the Old Bailey proceedings at www.oldbaileyonline.org. George had commenced his criminal career. A second appearance at the Old Bailey on the 17th of February 1831 provided a lengthy report when George was accused of feloniously breaking and entering a pawnbroker's premises in Gray's Inn Lane, London, accompanied by a couple of mates. The pawnbroker, in giving evidence, stated, quote,
"On Tuesday morning, the 15th of February, between 2 and 3 o'clock, I was disturbed by an unusual noise. I got out of bed, opened my bedroom door, and heard that which convinced me all was not right at the top of the house. I went down 2 pairs of stairs and called the assistance of my young men. I have 4. I awoke them all and armed myself with a sabre. I went up to my warerooms, which are the attics. There is a trapdoor in the ceiling. I observed the inner trapdoor was removed and a quantity of mortar on the floor. The outer trapdoor had been forced open by breaking the wood. I put my sabre up and made a noise with it, and then heard a trampling over the roof. I put up the window and gave an alarm. The police came to my assistance, sprang a rattle, and in about 20 minutes I saw all the prisoners in custody."
End quote. This time at the trial in the Old Bailey, George and his accomplices, having been found guilty, were sentenced to death. However, the sentences were all commuted to transportation for life, with passage to Australia paid from the public purse. George Lonsdale was taken to Portsmouth and placed on the prison hulk Captivity, where he was held for 5 months to await transportation. The New South Wales State Library has a number of guides available online under the heading Convicts Bound for Australia. www.guides.sl.nsw.gov.au.
Surrey 1 was the vessel that transported 200 male convicts to Australia, including George. Newcastle Family History Society has a publication entitled Surgeons at Sea, containing information about the surgeons on convict ships and their records detailing illnesses and events of note which occurred during the voyage. The Surrey's voyage must have been rather uneventful, with only one death having been recorded. Everyone else was landed safely in Sydney. The ship's indent is a must for anyone researching a convict, as it provides a physical description of your man or woman. George Lonsdale was described as being 5 foot 6 3/4 inches in height, with a ruddy complexion, brown hair, and blue eyes. He had a scar on the back of his left hand and an anchor tattooed inside his left arm. A Protestant, he could read and write and was unmarried. What a gift to anyone researching their ancestor. But the paper trail does not end there. Tickets of leave and conditional pardons are among the records easily available online. An application to marry was a compulsory requirement and would only happen if the governor approved. A married man could apply to the governor to have his wife and family brought out to join him, if that was his wish. Some, of course, did not take up that option, choosing instead to escape their unhappy bonds of matrimony, and with more and more women arriving in the colony, there was the possibility of finding another partner to share this new life. The Museums of History New South Wales is an interesting online site to explore, with a section titled Families of Convicts, found at www.mhnsw.au/guides. Convicts were assigned to work either for the government or for an individual who had applied for convict labour. George Lonsdale was assigned first to John Yeomans at Wilberforce. But when that man died, a second assignment saw George transferred to the district of Maitland to cut timber for Thomas Prentice. It is worthwhile to look at some of the large well-known online sites such as Ancestry, Find My Past or Family Search for convict records. They hold an amazing amount of information, including in some cases copies of actual documents, and although a fee might be involved, occasionally a brief period for research is offered at no cost.
Just as a large number of convicts came to Australia, so too did the many soldiers who guarded them. Some decided to stay in this country after their regiment's time in Australia had expired, and they opted to continue in some form of military service or law enforcement. Others turned their hand to farming, with varying degrees of success. Land grants were made to those deemed worthy to encourage a permanent settlement of the colony. The first land grant of 30 acres at Parramatta went to an ex-convict, James Roos, while the military officer, Captain George Johnston, received his grant of 100 acres at Annandale. Maybe the size of the grant indicated the status of the recipient. Another to receive a grant of 100 acres was Thomas Budd, Sergeant of the 46th Regiment of Foot, who saw much action in the Peninsular War, including that at Talavera, the name he later was to give his property, which fronted the road to Wollombi in the Hunter Valley. His grant was part of a British experiment to establish a civil society in a virgin landscape, and it was where he died, aged 42 years, and where his family chose to bury him. It is possible to find 2 arrival dates for your soldier, one when he came with his regiment, and later, when he was discharged overseas, he may have made the decision to return and settle in this country, especially if there were no longer any ties to England.
An excellent source of information for soldiers is the collection of paybooks stored on film at the Mitchell Library in Sydney. They are also available from the National Library's website. The records are arranged in regiments, and when you find your soldier ancestor, you will learn so many details of his colonial service. The paybooks show name, rank, location at musters, and daily rates of pay. Sometimes disciplinary issues may be recorded. Transfers from one regiment to another allow you to follow a man's career over time. The books also contain lists of deserters, new recruits, and discharges. As well as the soldiers, there were the seamen manning the transport vessels. It was not uncommon for men to jump ship at any port, changing their name, and make their way to any one of the newly developing settlements around the country. If this might be a possibility for your ancestor, referring to books on ship's deserters might offer a glimmer of hope for your research. One such book, written by Ray Sexton and published by the Australasian Maritime Historical Society, is titled The Deserters, and contains lists of both military and naval deserters along with their descriptions. Joseph Edwards, able-bodied seaman, is one of the many entries, with his entry showing he was 35 years, 5 months of age, 5 foot 4.5 inches in height, sallow complexion, light brown hair, grey eyes. 7 stars on the left arm, anchor on right hand. Born Hackney, Middlesex, resided Gravesend. A stout, thick-set man, very muscular and sulky-looking, formerly served in HM's ships Rainbow, Cordelia and Pincher. The Newcastle Family History Society's copy of this work can be found on our library shelves. Deserters' names were sometimes advertised in the state's police gazettes, and you can find the New South Wales Police Gazettes in Trove. At this point, I would like to point out what a wonderful resource Trove is. Managed by the National Library of Australia, it is a free online research portal, allowing access to digitised newspapers, gazettes, journals, and books from across Australia and from 1803 up to 1954. Like the soldiers who guarded the convicts on the journey to Australia, some Marines had signed on for the duration of the voyage, but then decided to remain in this new country. 8 Marines received small land grants in 1792 in a district known as Field of Mars, on the north side of Sydney Harbour, but by 1800 some had sold their grants. Farming was not for them.
Among those choosing to come to Australia were assisted immigrants. These are people, often whole families, who were sponsored in some way for their voyage to this country. Schemes were established to bring people out who possessed skills required in the settlement and development of the new country. One early example is of 2 Irish girls, Mary Harding and her sister Anne, who, having satisfied all physical and moral requirements, came to Australia in 1839 on board the Andromache to act as housemaids under a bounty scheme organised by Mr. W. Marshall. He was paid a bounty of £15 for organising the safe arrival of a single woman, but a single man under this scheme would have attracted only a bounty of £10. With their positions having been arranged before departure, both girls would have been glad that their work placed them in the area of Maitland, as they could offer support to each other when perhaps feeling a little homesick for Ireland. It was Anne Harding who soon caught the eye of Edmund Wright, and they were married in 1840 in the chapel of St Mary's Anglican Church, Maitland. A copy of their marriage certificate has the words, "with consent of the governor," written on it, a sure sign that one or both of the parties was a convict. In this case, the convict was Edmund Wright. It was in the following year that Mary Harding was married to George Lonsdale, their marriage certificate also bearing the words confirming the convict status of George. Anne and Mary both supported their husbands in a local hotel business. Anne and Edmund Wright at the Spread Eagle in Rutherford, and Mary and George Lonsdale at the Red Lion in Lochinvar, before they moved into Maitland as hosts of the Cross Keys Inn. Checking in Trove has certainly helped to fill out the picture of these two families, with several reports appearing in the Maitland Mercury and Hunter River General Advertiser. I would never have thought of looking at that newspaper, and would therefore never have known about Mary, heavily pregnant, having been assaulted in the bar of the Red Lion Hotel by a drunken, pistol-waving lout, or the fact that Edmund Wright was accused of striking his inebriated mother-in-law and locking her in her room. Incidentally, Edmund Wright was in a financial position to sponsor his mother-in-law, Dorothy Harding, paying for her journey from Ireland and proving he could support her after her arrival. How he must have rued that decision.
The Index to New South Wales Immigration Deposits Combined Index 1853 to 1900 refers to monies deposited in the colony by settlers wishing to sponsor the immigration of a nominated person or family. If you knew the vessel they were supposed to be coming on, perhaps a look at the ship's passenger list would confirm the arrival or not of your ancestor. Sometimes folks change their mind about leaving their homeland, and at other times death might have intervened. It is helpful if you know the occupation of your ancestor, as that might explain the reason for their arrival. For instance, the Australian Agricultural Company brought many men and families to Australia to assist with the running of their rural properties. Newly developed mining companies brought experienced miners from places such as Scotland, Cornwall and Wales, while later still the vine dressers of Germany were sought for their skills in establishing vineyards. A recent Newcastle Family History Society's publication, The People of Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, contains stories about 3 such German families: Chris Baker's Wilhelm and Anna Maria Jaeger, and Margaret Asher's Frederick and Johanna Kramer, and Jacob Bush with his wife Elizabeth Gregorius. These 3 stories give us an insight into the conditions for emigration to Australia, difficulties in becoming accepted socially, and the problems associated with establishing a vineyard, all of which these families overcame.
Unassisted immigrants are people who paid for their own passage to Australia. If your ancestor was a member of this group, you could be in for a long search to find just when and why they arrived in this country. There are some indexes, such as the Unassisted Immigrants Index 1842 to 55, newspaper indexes, government gazettes and such, that could be drawn to your attention if you visit a library or a family history society to carry out research. But unassisted immigrants are perhaps the most difficult to trace due to the lack of a paper trail.
If your ancestors came from Europe or Asia, a search of naturalisation records via the internet could be helpful. But bear in mind that naturalisation was never compulsory, so your ancestors may not have decided to relinquish citizenship of their birth country to become Australian citizens. But if they did decide to take that step, these naturalisation records are an important source of information which can include date and place of birth, names of parents with occupation of the father, and place of parents' origin, as well as the name of the ship, date and port of arrival. If you are lucky, there might also be a photograph of your ancestor in these records. The National Archives of Australia in Canberra holds the naturalisation records for the Commonwealth of Australia from 1904. Records prior to that are held by various state archives. Detailed information on naturalisation records held by the National Archives of Australia can be found on guides such as Citizenship in Australia, a guide to Commonwealth government records, or Fact Sheet 68, naturalisation records held in Canberra. For records held by each state, refer to a state archives website.
Although your patience may be tested, it is well worth the time and effort spent in locating and verifying your first ancestor to arrive in Australia. It puts you well on the way to ensuring your family's life story has all its pages.
Great tips, Maree and Ken, on tackling those how, when, and why questions. Understanding your ancestors' arrival in Australia can indeed offer a crucial foundation for your family's narratives. We have more episodes coming in this series, The Wonderful World of Genealogy, so why not join us again soon on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.